Hello. Good morning. Thank you, TJ, and everyone who organized this conference for inviting myself. Like I said, I'd just like to thank everyone for inviting our work here. It's a great honor, and it's also very timely, considering the current proliferation of the extractive industry in Greece, where I've been working for the past 3 years, since 2013, with my collaborator, Angela Melitopoulos, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because we're also in the middle of producing a new video installation, and she needed to stay in Germany for that. I'm going to my talk will be a little bit different than the introduction. I'll get a little bit more specific into the situation in Greece. I don't know how much people know about it, so. I'm also a little bit tired, I have to admit. I had a very long trip yesterday. In 2013, Angela Melitopoulos and I traveled to the village of Megali Pania in northern Greece for the first time, having heard about the fact that a Canadian mining company wanted to construct an open-pit gold mine in the heart of the mountains there. We arrived in a moment of tremendous tension between the opposition to the mine and those supporting it. And ironically, we also arrived just after Naomi Klein had been there filming and researching for her book and film, This Changes Everything. Demonstrations by local people against the mine had been met with buses of riot police, tear gas, and rubber bullets in the middle of the forest, in many instances resulting in injuries on both sides. In retaliation, there had been a large coordinated arson attack on mining equipment a few months earlier, leading the police to launch a full-on assault of the anti-mining movement, arresting people and forcibly taking their DNA samples. It was on this first trip that we researched and recorded the material for the first Unearthing disaster film, which we will watch after my presentation, and began what would become a long-term engagement with our new friends in the anti-mining movement in Greece. Over the course of our work, we have created a radio project called Radio Schizoanalytique, which you can listen to online, and filmed a second part of Unearthing disaster in 2015. I'm going to start by showing a few images, maps, in order to give us some geographical orientation. The first image you see you might recognize is a map of Europe. The red dot over on the right-hand side of the screen indicates the location of the Skouries open pit mine in northeastern Greece, 1 hour east of Thessaloniki. Megali Pania in Greek means great lady. The Greek word Skouries, which is the name of this open pit mine, in English is translated as rust and refers to waste material left over from a metallurgical process. This is an important point to make here because the history of mining in the region of Halkidiki is very old and goes back to antiquity. There is a great deal of archaeological evidence that suggests that the area surrounding the current Skouries open pit mine was one of the major metallurgical centers of ancient Greece, producing copper coins stamped with the image of Alexander the Great, amongst other things. In fact, in the center of the open pit mine, you can imagine, as they've been working, they've been unearthing major archaeological sites that they're actually trying to not tell anyone about. That's a whole other story that we could talk about later. From the 1970s until very recently, mining represented only a small part of the economy in the region, and there were only a few hundred people employed in mining, working in underground mines that were producing mostly lead and zinc. One of the major economic activities in the region, are sustainable and depend on the health of the ecosystem, including agriculture, apiculture, forestry, and tourism. And here you see one of the olive fields of one of the protagonists in our film. He's one of the few people producing organic olives in the region around Megali Pania. With over 1,000 beekeepers, Halkidiki is one of the major honey-producing regions of Greece and of Europe. Beekeeping in the region has an important symbiotic relationship to the other agricultural products like olives, grapes, nuts, and various fruits and herbs, as the bees are used to pollinate the trees and plants. The beekeepers move their bees depending on what flowers are currently in bloom, which results in a multitude of different types of honey that are produced in a single year in Halkidiki. Wild forest products like sustainably harvested wood, mushrooms, berries, and wild herbs are also a significant part of the economy and of people's lives. This image is a close-up of the municipality of Aristoteles in Halkidiki, named after the philosopher Aristotle, who was born there and whose tomb was recently identified near the archaeological site of ancient Stagira. The colored lines indicate areas of significant biodiversity that the EU has identified as worthy of protection under their program called Natura 2000. You'll notice that there are some green areas to the right that are not included in the designation, although they seem to be connected to and are just as green, if not greener, than the rest of the Natura 2000 zone. What you see here is the overlay of the Cassandra mining concessions in Halkidiki. You'll notice that they fit in very nicely with the Natura 2000 map, an indication that this region has been designated as a kind of sacrifice zone by both the Greek state and the European Union. And you see there the yellow lines indicate the limits of the direct permit for the exploratory activities of the mining company. The red line, which is a bigger line, indicates a region that they could apply for permits for should they feel the need to do so. And the smaller, darker regions are where they're actively working right now. Indeed, the area of the Cassandra mining concessions was designated a mining area by a special law known as the Mineral Act, passed in 1973 by the right-wing military junta government. The Mineral Act gives precedence to mining activities in these areas, superseding constitutional law and giving a tremendous amount of power to the mining companies operating there. Rumor has it that in the early 1960s, it was a Japanese company that built the first exploratory tunnel just below the location of the current open-pit mine in the Skorias forest. And in the background, I don't know if you can see, you might not be able to see it, there's a small tunnel going into the side of the hill there. And in the foreground, you see some sort of brownish water, and that is actually from the current drilling by the current mining company. The effect, calculated or not, that this tunnel had was to drain the water from the high mountain springs that were used to irrigate the scattering of nearby orchards, which had been tended to for generations. When the springs stopped flowing, it became extremely difficult to water the fields, and the fruit and nut trees dried up and were largely abandoned. And here you see one of these fields. This field is actually in the middle of the current mining operations. To the left, you see the razor wire fence that is so you cannot cross into the mining area, and also to the right-hand side. I should add that these mountains were a stronghold for the partisans fighting during World War II and the Greek Civil War, and they are highly significant to the people who live around the mountains in terms of resistance to the Nazi dictatorship and the right-wing military junta government afterwards. Since the enactment of the Mineral Act and the drilling of the first modern exploratory tunnel, the Cassandra mines have passed through many hands via a series of corrupt and non-transparent deals involving the Greek state and Canadian mining companies. When TVX Gold acquired the Cassandra mining concessions in 1995, one of the first things they did was to convince the local orchard owners to sell their largely disused mountain fields. Unaware of any future plans to construct an open-pit mine, many local farmers were persuaded with above-market prices to sell their land, a fateful decision that most people now deeply regret. In 1997, TVX Gold built another underground exploratory tunnel leading to the middle of the current Skorias open-pit mine. This tunnel was 800 meters long and at a lower elevation than the first tunnel. Expecting to find water flowing at 30 cubic meters per hour, They instead came into contact with water flowing at 350 cubic meters per hour. As evidenced by their errant water pressure calculations, the geological system of underground aquifers in the Castelli Cacavos Mountains is complex and unpredictable. This complexity is expressed on the surface through the countless springs, streams, and waterfalls that flow from the mountains. And here you see a picture inside of the tunnel filled with water. Largely abandoned after its construction, the second tunnel has been draining water out of the mountain ever since. In 2003, local residents in the village of Stratoniki sued TVX Gold for damages to the foundations of their houses by underground blasting. TVX Gold filed for bankruptcy, and the Greek state bought the Cassandra mines for a mere 11 million euros, releasing TVX of all responsibility for the damage their mining activities had caused. That same day, the Greek state sold the mining concessions to Hellas Gold, a mining company formed on paper a few days earlier by the Greek construction company Aktor, which is owned by the Bobolas family, who also owns the Greek television station Mega, as well as several major radio broadcasters. And you can imagine where this is going. This Bobolas is kind of like a Berlusconi of Greece. And coincidentally, they have never paid a single license fee for any of their television or radio channels. Up until now, that their memorandums have been changing the licensing laws for media companies. This sale was never publicized, and Hellas Gold is now being fined by the European Union for violating the rules of competition. And the Greek state has been ordered to recover 15.3 million euros from Hellas Gold for the actual market value of the concessions, which has yet to be done. Hellas Gold was subsequently taken over by European Goldfields, another Canadian mining company whose CEO, Frank Timis, went on to found Gabriel Resources, the mining company currently trying to build the highly contested gold mine in Roșia Montana in Romania. It was in September 2006, during the first presentation of European Goldfields' business plan in the village of Megalipania, that the local residents learned about the plan to build an open-pit gold mine in the mountains. From that day onward, there has been an assembly in Megalipania every week. In May 2010, after the financial shocks of the housing crisis in the US, the Greek government announced that it was unable to meet their fiscal obligations to their bondholders, seeking assistance from the European Union and the IMF. The response to Greece's inability to pay its international creditors was not a new one, but one that has been used time and time again in South America, Africa, Asia, and the countries of the former East Bloc. The European Central Bank and the IMF, with the encouragement of Germany, demanded a regime of deregulation and privatization, decimating spending on social programs and infrastructure, and opening up the country to investment by foreign capital. This is the free market economic shock therapy Naomi Klein writes about in The Shock Doctrine, perfected in the testing grounds of countries like Indonesia, Brazil, China, Argentina in the late 60s and early 70s. In February 2012, when the gold price was at a record high, the Vancouver, Canada-based, quote, low-cost gold mining company, Eldorado Gold, acquired the Cassandra mines by taking over European Goldfields, making Hellas Gold the Greek subsidiary of Eldorado Gold in Halkidiki. Eldorado Gold also took over the financing structure set up by European Goldfields via mailbox companies in the Netherlands, which allowed for the tax-free transfer of interest, which it essentially charges itself for and then pays itself back for, channeling this money practically tax-free into offshore bank accounts in Barbados. There's an excellent report that was prepared by a Dutch NGO called SOMO entitled Fool's Gold on how Eldorado Gold's tax avoidance mechanisms contribute to human rights violations in Greece. I can highly recommend reading it, it's very interesting. One of the first actions that Eldorado Gold took in a moment of symbolic fulfillment of their promise of job creation while simultaneously ensuring their control over the mountains was to recruit potential mine workers to evict local activists from the watch post in the mountains, the Phylakio Ahona, the watchtower of the struggle, where they had been blocking cars from the archaeological service from reaching the site of the future open pit. This little house had served as a meeting point for the anti-mining movement since they had constructed it in 2009. On March 20th, 2012, while a few police who were present stood aside and watched, a mob of 500 men armed with rocks and sticks attacked the 35 unarmed local residents. The workers completely destroyed the house, throwing bottles and rocks. They tore off the green roof and smashed all the dishes inside. This violent act marked the beginning of Eldorado Gold's total assault on the landscape. With the help of heavily armed riot police and private security, militant workers, security cameras, and guard dogs, the war machine of Eldorado Gold territorialized in the Skouries forest in the Castelli Kakavos Mountains. This also marked the beginning of a state of de facto civil war between the mine workers and those who saw mining as a threat to their very existence. I should mention that these police are guarding the gates of the processing factory being built by Eldorado Gold. The sacrifices demanded by the politics of austerity that Greece is being subjected to, and which we see at work in many places on the globe, are sacrifices on all levels: social, ecological, mental, and spiritual. Sacrifice, that archaic motor of heteronormative societies, is embedded in capitalist debt crisis, where the symbolic value of capital, itself a fictional value, takes precedent over all other systems of value, and therefore we must limit our potentials, our desires, our effective relations to human and non-human others, our dreams and our futures. This is why we can understand that the debt crisis is first and foremost a crisis of subjectivity, because all other measures of value and ways of surviving are being taken away. Right now you see a picture of one of the sites of one of the tailings dams that they have deforested in order to put the mining wastes there. This is a picture of the processing plant that they are building in the middle of the forest there. It is like a spaceship that has landed. It's crazy to see. Since that fateful day in 2012, Eldorado Gold has been transforming small forest roads into mega highways, violently clear-cutting thousands of trees, draining the water table, and slowly transforming the collectively producing symbiotic forest ecosystem into an artificial gray-yellow desert. The Skouries open pit mine will be at least 700 meters wide and 220 meters deep. Out of 1 ton of earth, between 0.5 and 0.8 grams of gold can be extracted. This means that to produce a gold bar weighing 1 kilogram, between 1,250 and 2,000 tons of earth must be pulverized. Eldorado Gold plans to pulverize at least 200 million tons of earth at their mine in the Skouries forest. And here we see, this is a satellite image from 2014, where you can kind of see their beginning of their quote-unquote work in the forest there. And here's what it will look like once they get started, I guess. The open pit mine is on the lower left side, and then these two big red and yellow things are the valleys that will be filled in with their toxic waste. The subterranean mineralization of the region is complex and houses a variety of elements that in their singular combinations gives the Earth's surface its particular characteristics, energies, and metaphysical properties. Mining's chemical warfare starts with the violent separation of these elements from each other, resulting in the transformation of stable physical and chemical forms into dangerous particles and toxic substances because of the changes in their physical shape or molecular composition. The mechanical intervention between surface and depth brings water and air into contact with substances like heavy metals and sulfide minerals. This contact results in the release of these substances into the water and the air, and their subsequent distribution over a vast area via winds and flowing water. The rock just below the Earth's surface in the location of the Skouries mine is known to contain high concentrations of arsenic and fibrous tremolite, a naturally occurring form of asbestos. Dangerously high levels of asbestos were already identified in the air around the Skouries mine by a Greek environmental regulatory body in 2016. Should blasting ever begin, the mine will produce over 2,000 tons of asbestos-laden dust per hour for the next 7 years, at least. And these are pictures of the current location of the open pit mine. This was in 2016. Groundwater in surrounding villages is already contaminated with high levels of arsenic, manganese, and iron from Eldorado Gold's endless exploratory drilling. Despite the very real dangers, the mine workers ally themselves to the company in true neoliberal form, asserting that their self-vampirizing jobs are more important than their own health and that of the surrounding environment, while claiming that they work for the benefit of the nation-state, their communities, and their families. In actuality, the only revenue the Greek state receives from the so-called development project is from the income tax paid by the mine workers. The anti-mining movement in Halkidiki has been met by violent repression on the part of the state security apparatuses, the company, and the miners themselves. Through tear gas, economic boycotts, and endless criminal charges, the grassroots struggle in Halkidiki has been put under tremendous pressure to give up their fight. Being able to relate to a landscape is a learned process, and the destruction of a landscape is first of all a destruction of knowledge and memory, a removal of detail and texture, and the implementation of a politics that aims to disable our capacity to act. It is a forced deterritorialization which throws people off the land and into the free fall of the capitalist economy. These are images from a demonstration in January 2016, where they actually managed to push the fence over into the mine, which was quite a challenging feat. Didn't last very long though. As a metaphor of capitalism par excellence, the shiny surface of gold masks the machines at work behind its physical, mental, aesthetic, economic, semiological, historical, and mythological production. In Molecular Revolution, Felix Guattari writes that it is impossible to separate the production of any consumer commodity from the institution that supports its production. The same can be said of teaching, training, research, etc. The state machine and the machine of repression produce anti-production, that is to say, signifiers that exist to block and prevent the emergence of any subjective process. This anti-production, the hindrance of the emergence of spontaneous creative processes and their organizational expression, is what is at work in this new accelerated phase of primitive accumulation. It functions on many levels, including through the machines of fear and violence, shutting down the potential eco-mental pathways and nurturing the production of serial subjectivities, which lend themselves to capitalist subjection. And this is a photo of a demonstration where people from Magalipania actually built a wall to block the road so the company's trucks and buses of workers could not get to the mine location. And on it says, stop messing with our archaeological sites, and no to migration, which they're referring to their own migration here. There is an intimate connection between media production and the apprehension of the world, and also how the ways in which this apprehension, and subsequently the potential for creation, is limited and controlled in modern capitalist society in ways that are not always readily identifiable. This connection between media and apprehension makes the use of media in non-conventional ways all the more critical in these times of capitalist economic crisis. In a reworking of his thesis on the politics of aesthetics and the distribution of the sensible, Rancière writes that, quote, artistic practices take part in the partition of the perceptible insofar as they suspend the ordinary coordinates of the sensory experience and reframe the network of relationships between spaces and times, subjects and objects, the common and the singular. It is exactly this potential of artistic production which makes it a critical tool in the production of an ecosophical way of thinking the world, or in Guattari's words, an ethical political articulation between three ecological registers: the environment, social relations, and human subjectivity. It is in the spirit of an ethical political articulation between these three ecological registers that we approach the microcosm of the Skoria's gold mine, where the energies of artisanal creation, which exist in symbiosis with the natural environment, are on a high-speed collision course with the deterritorializing and alienating forces of finance capitalism, threatening to wipe out the accumulated experiences and knowledge connected to the land in the name of progress and job creation. In order to resist this serialization and prevent the imminent desertification of our social, mental, and environmental landscapes, in order to counter this desertification, the machines at work must be identified and understood for what they are, not as natural or inevitable, but as blockages, as forced de- and re-territorialization which, quote, in the absence of ecological praxis, tends towards inconsistency, producing anxiety, guilt, and forms of psychopathological repetition. We must work towards a feminist and post-human ethics that recognizes the value of creative production, having as our goal, as Rosie Braidotti puts it, on the transformation of negative into positive passions. And on that note, I would then show you the first part of Unearthing Disaster from 2013.